Some fighters step into the ring to chase a dream.
Cut out with Mike Tyson. Oh, the right hand! I doubt if he'll be able to get up from this.
Sonny Liston stepped in because there was nowhere else to go. Born into pain, hardened by the streets, and controlled by forces far bigger than himself, his rise was unstoppable.
In December 1960, Sonny Liston was controlled by powerful racketeer groups.
But so was his fall. The darkness that followed him never let go. He had fists like stone, a jab like a sledgehammer, and a chin that could take anything.
Sonny had destroyed the division.
He has awesome power. He's given us some exciting fights.
Then came Muhammad Ali, young, fearless, and faster than anything Liston had ever seen.
Do you really think you can beat Sonny Liston?
I don't think I can beat him. I know I can beat him.
But in the end, for him, it wasn't punches that beat him. It was the people who owned him.
But I don't think that Liston tried as hard as he should.
Until one day he was gone. This is the tragic true story of Sonny Liston. The first thing Sonny learned was pain. Not discipline, not love, just pain. His father, Tobe Liston, was a towering figure in the worst way possible. An abusive sharecropper who ruled the household with a leather strap. Sonny never had a childhood. He was just another pair of hands to work the fields. By the time he was a teenager, he was already built like a man. Broad shoulders, thick arms, fists like bricks. But strength meant nothing when the world saw you as nothing. His mother eventually left for St. Louis, and Sonny, left behind, had no choice but to follow. St. Louis had nothing for a boy like him. No jobs, no education, no way up, but there was crime. His first real uniform wasn't a boxing robe, it was a prison jumpsuit. Armed robbery landed him in the Missouri State Penitentiary, a place known as the bloodiest 47 acres in America. But prison did something the outside world never did. It gave him a purpose. Father Alois Stevens, a Catholic priest, ran the prison's athletic program. When he saw Liston throw a punch, he knew this wasn't just another inmate. Sonny hit like a heavyweight champion, even with no formal training. Under the guidance of prison guards and boxing coaches, he refined his raw power. By the time he left prison, he had something new, an identity. He wasn't just Sonny Liston, the street thug. He was Sonny Liston, the fighter. But when he walked out of prison, he didn't walk out a free man. Boxing in the 1950s wasn't just a sport, it was an industry. And industries have owners. The mob had their hands on him before he even knew what was happening. They put him in fights, controlled his career, and made money off every win. He wasn't asked if he wanted to be a boxer. He was told. He didn't become a fighter. He became a product, a weapon, loaded and aimed. They called him a natural, a beast, a force of nature. But nature had nothing to do with it. The mob moved Liston like a chess piece, setting up fights, collecting payouts, and making sure their investment paid off.
As of December 1960, Sonny Liston was controlled by powerful racketeer groups. Under the leadership of Frank Carbo, Mr. Gray, the superintendent, one of the most feared gunmen of the Prohibition era, and the undisputed czar of the professional sport.
They didn't care about his dreams, only his fists. And those fists were making them rich. Liston tore through opponents like they owed him something. His punches weren't just powerful, they were terrifying.
Hook to the head is the first good punch of the fight.
Knockouts came fast, too fast. The kind that didn't just end fights, but ended careers. And people noticed. But fear isn't the same as respect. But Sonny Liston didn't enter the boxing world like most fighters. He came straight from prison, scarred, hardened, and already feared. But that fear wasn't just about his fists. His reputation outside the ring followed him everywhere. Liston wasn't just a boxer, he was a problem. When Liston was released from prison in 1952, his trainers knew they had something special.
Sonny Liston belongs among the 5 greatest heavyweights of all time.
A heavyweight with raw power, unnatural strength, and a mean streak that couldn't be taught. But getting him fights wasn't easy. Promoters didn't want to deal with him. Boxing commissions hesitated to license him. His own manager warned him, "Sonny, you'll have to knock people out just to get decisions." Liston didn't need to be told twice. By 1953, Sonny Liston stepped into the ring for his professional debut. He wasn't just fighting his opponent, he was fighting for a way out. Within a year, his raw power and relentless style made him a rising force in the heavyweight division. But his past wouldn't let go so easily. With each victory, his reputation grew, but so did the whispers about his connections, his temper, and whether boxing was ready for a champion like him. By 1954, he was already facing experienced heavyweights, men with years in the ring, but it didn't matter. Marty Marshall was one of the few who managed to beat him, breaking Sonny's jaw in the process. But when they rematched, Liston left no doubts. He knocked Marshall out cold. The boxing world had seen its share of punchers. But Liston wasn't just powerful, he fought like a man who enjoyed breaking people, and that made him dangerous. For most fighters, success means breaking free from their past. For Sonny Liston, success only tightened the chains. Behind the scenes, the underworld had its hands on him. His manager, Frank Blinky Palermo, wasn't just a boxing man, he was a mobster. A key figure in the Philadelphia crime syndicate, Palermo had been fixing fights and controlling fighters for years. And now, he had Sonny Liston. Liston wasn't just fighting for himself, he was an investment. The mob funded his training. They picked his opponents. They dictated his career. And when Sonny stepped out of line, they reminded him who was in charge. In 1956, he got into a fight with a police officer outside a bar in St. Louis. The officer wound up in the hospital. Liston wound up in jail. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Every time Sonny seemed ready to break into the big leagues, trouble found him. Or maybe he found it. By 1958, Liston had built a terrifying reputation. He wasn't just another contender. He was the contender. The only problem? No one wanted to fight him. Champions dodged him, contenders made excuses. Sonny Liston wasn't just feared inside the ring, he was feared everywhere. And soon, he would have his shot at proving why. On September 2nd, 1953, he stepped into the ring to fight his very first professional boxing match with Don Smith. Within the first few minutes, Sonny Liston, a 21-year-old ex-convict with a sledgehammer for a right hand, he ended the fight with the first-round knockout. No one would have been surprised by this if they knew what was about to come. Over the next decade, he fought like a lion without a leash. He dismantled opponents with an almost casual brutality. His reach was long, his jab punishing, and his demeanor coldly efficient. Sports writers called him the most dangerous man in boxing. And then in 1960 came Cleveland Williams, 6'2", built like a wrecking ball, and mean. He could punch like a truck, and he had the fire to back it up. But fire wasn't enough. Not against Liston.
To the head. Williams goes down for the second time from that barrage of punches.
Cleveland Williams, when I fought Cleveland Williams after I went to the dressing room, he could punch real hard and fast. And after that fight, I felt that I could beat anybody.
Yet despite his dominance, the boxing establishment viewed him with suspicion and disdain. His criminal past and alleged ties to organized crime made him a pariah. He was feared in the ring but shunned outside it. Everyone knew who really called the shots. The mob had built him, owned him, and wasn't letting him go easy. He was a lucrative investment. Each victory lined their pockets. Liston fought, but he never belonged to himself. Every victory fattened someone else's pockets. Every knockout deepened his chains. But everyone's was afraid of talking about him. Yet they whispered about his power like it was a ghost story. Even the champion, Floyd Patterson, knew what Liston was, and he wanted no part of him, but it wasn't his choice to make. But avoiding Sonny Liston wasn't an option, not when the mob wanted their champion. The title fight was set, and what happened next would change boxing forever. Boxing had a champion, but it wasn't Sonny Liston. The media, promoters, and even the White House had their man, Floyd Patterson. Young, disciplined, soft-spoken, he was everything boxing wanted to be. He shook hands with presidents. He gave polite interviews. He smiled. Sonny Liston didn't smile. He didn't play the part. And that made him a problem. The establishment didn't just dislike Liston. They feared him. He was too dangerous, too uncontrollable, and too tied to the wrong people. Even President John F. Kennedy privately urged Patterson not to fight him, but the mob wasn't taking no for an answer. The fight had to happen. September 25th, 1962. The night boxing had no say in its own champion. The air was thick with tension. When Patterson walked out, the crowd roared. When Liston followed, they booed. He wasn't just fighting Patterson, he was fighting the world's judgment. The press called him a brute, a thug, a disgrace to the sport. And yet, they couldn't deny what they saw. Because when Liston stepped into the ring, he looked like something out of a nightmare. Patterson had speed, skill, heart. He'd fought tough men before, but Liston wasn't a man. He was inevitability. The bell rang. And then, destruction. Liston didn't fight Patterson. He erased him. A single left hook sent Patterson crashing down in the first round. He got up, barely. Another knockdown, and another. 2 minutes and 6 seconds. That's all it took. The shortest heavyweight title fight in 50 years. No build-up, no back and forth, just raw power. Sonny Liston was the champion of the world. But in response, Sonny Liston was the heavyweight champion of the world. But it didn't feel like it.
Sonny Liston became heavyweight champion of the world on the night of September 25th, 1962, in a fight that lasted only 2 minutes and 6 seconds.
No celebration, no parade, no adoring headlines. The sport had crowned a new king, yet the world refused to acknowledge him. Liston had fought for respect, but all he got was silence. Heavyweight champions were supposed to be invited to the White House. Liston? Never. The press didn't celebrate him. They buried him in criticism. The crowd that booed him before the fight, they booed him after too. And the tragic irony? He wanted legitimacy, but his victory only deepened his exile. In the meanwhile, Patterson demanded a rematch. Maybe he thought it was a fluke. Maybe he thought he could survive the storm a second time, and the media supported. But when he fought Liston for the second time, it was worse than before, and brought even bigger humility. Nothing had changed this time either. Another knockout.
2 jarring right hands are followed by the knockout blow.
Worse than the first, and the media still refusing to give the deserved respect. At that moment, there was no doubt. Sonny Liston was the most feared fighter on the planet. He had everything, and still, he was nothing. By 1964, boxing had found its anti-Liston, Cassius Clay. He was loud, fast, and he was unafraid. He didn't just challenge Liston, he taunted him, calling him a big, ugly bear.
The oldest man to retire is Sonny Liston, the big ugly bear.
And promising to float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
To see the world's greatest fighter, the world's prettiest fighter, the oldest prophet, the oldest poet in the fight game today.
Do you really think you can beat Sonny Liston?
I don't think I can beat him. I know I can beat him.
Where Liston ruled through brute force, Clay moved like he was fighting in another dimension. Speed, footwork, precision. It was as if the sport itself had evolved overnight. An unstoppable force was about to meet an immovable object. But before they ever threw a punch, the fight had already begun. Ali, still known as Cassius Clay, wasn't just fast in the ring. He was fast with his mouth. And Liston, he had never dealt with anyone like him before. At press conferences, Ali called him a big, ugly bear and promised to dance circles around him. He showed up at Liston's training camp shouting insults from outside the fence. He crashed the way in, screaming so wildly that doctors thought he had lost his mind. Liston had fought plenty of men who were stronger, tougher, and meaner than Ali, but none who got inside his head like this. By the time they stepped into the ring in Miami, something was different. The world expected another Liston demolition. Vegas had him as a 7-1 favorite. The press barely covered Ali. Some reporters didn't even bother writing 2 versions of the fight story. They assumed Liston would walk through him like he had everyone else. But from the opening bell, Ali wasn't there to be walked through. He moved like no heavyweight Liston had ever faced. His feet danced, his hands stayed low, and when he snapped a jab, it landed before Sonny could even react. By the third round, Liston's left eye was swelling shut. By the fourth, he was swinging wildly at nothing. By the sixth, he slumped on his stool and told his corner he wasn't coming out. Just like that, the monster had fallen, the invincible Sonny Liston, beaten not by power, but by speed, precision, and a man who had refused to fear him. But if that loss was shocking, what happened next was even stranger. 15 months later, the rematch took place in Lewiston, Maine, a fight surrounded by rumors. Some believed Liston had thrown the first fight, others thought the rematch would be his redemption. But what happened in the first round only deepened the mystery. Ali flicked out a quick right hand. Liston hit the canvas. It wasn't a knockout punch, at least not one that looked like it. But Sonny stayed down. Referee Jersey Joe Walcott hesitated. Ali stood over Liston, screaming at him to get up. Chaos erupted. When Walcott finally counted, the fight was already over. Ali had won again.
Has gotten information that Liston was down for a count of 10
and Sonny Liston, once the most feared man in boxing, had become something else entirely. A question mark. Had he been paid to take a dive? Did he quit to avoid the Nation of Islam, who had been threatening him? Or had he simply reached the point where he no longer wanted to fight? No one knew for sure. What was certain was this: Sonny Liston would never fight for the heavyweight title again. And then came the fight. The odds favored Liston. He was still the most feared man in the ring. His power was unquestioned. Clay, for all his talk, was untested at this level. No one, not even the most devoted fans, truly believed he could survive Liston's fists. But from the opening bell, something was off. Clay was too fast, too confident. Liston swung, but he missed. Again and again, Clay danced, dodged, grinned. He made Liston look slow, clumsy, ordinary. Then came the sixth round. Between rounds, Liston didn't stand. He didn't even argue. He just sat there. Then he quit. The official reason? A shoulder injury. But no one believed it.
They might be stopping it. That might be all, ladies and gentlemen.
Liston had never backed down before. He fought through pain, through broken noses, through everything. And now, against a 22-year-old kid, he was just done? Some said it was exhaustion. Others said it was fear. But the whispers of a fix were louder than anything else. Had the mob pulled the strings? Had Liston taken a dive? The questions never stopped. But boxing didn't wait for answers. Clay was the champion now. The torch had been passed, whether Liston liked it or not.
Here we go. Tactics the same as in the first fight, established.
A year later, a second fight was scheduled. But by now, everything had changed. Clay was no longer Clay. He was Muhammad Ali. A new man with a new name, a new purpose. And Liston, he was a ghost of his former self. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. A single punch, a right hand barely visible, and Liston collapsed. He didn't fight to get up. He barely moved. The referee hesitated. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't even boo. They just stared because they knew. Something wasn't right. The phantom punch, they called it. A blow so soft, it looked like it never landed. And yet, Liston stayed down. The count reached 10, and it was over. Was it real? Was it a fix? Liston never gave a straight answer. Some said he was paid to lose. Others whispered controversies. But one thing was clear. Overnight, Sonny Liston went from feared to forgotten. His aura of invincibility vanished. And not just that. This fight changed everything for him. After the loss to Ali, Sonny Liston was no longer the most feared man in boxing. He was something worse. Irrelevant. No one wanted to fight him. He was too dangerous for rising contenders, yet too tainted for the establishment. The sport that once feared him had cast him aside. But while boxing let go of Liston, the underworld never did. The mob still owned him. Without the heavyweight title, his worth had dropped, but not enough to set him free. He fought a few more matches, knockout wins against lesser opponents, hoping for one last shot at redemption. It never came. The sport had moved on. And then, in 1970, Liston was found dead in his Las Vegas home. The official cause? A heroin overdose. But the details didn't add up. There were no needle marks on his arms, no known history of drug use. His wife, Geraldine, claimed he was terrified of needles. The scene felt staged, too neat, too perfect. Some whispered that it was a mob hit. Maybe he had outlived his usefulness. Maybe he knew too much. Others believed he had crossed the wrong people. Maybe a deal had gone bad. Maybe it was just another case of the underworld cleaning up loose ends. And just like that, Sonny Liston, the most feared fighter of his era, was gone. No answers. No justice. Just silence. By the end, he was just another fallen fighter. History has never known what to do with Sonny Liston. He wasn't a beloved champion. He wasn't a tragic underdog. He wasn't even a villain people loved to hate. He was an outcast, a man whose victories never felt like wins, whose defeats were always in question. The man no one wanted to win. Maybe he was never supposed to. Even in death, his story remains unfinished. A champion who never truly belonged. A fighter who was feared, then forgotten. A mystery that still lingers in the shadows of boxing history. Because when Sonny Liston fell, inside and outside the ring, no one was ever sure if he fell, or if he was pushed.